I'm Cathy Yang, your intel on the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas resumes its rate-cutting cycle. The 25 basis point reduction, the first by a central bank in Southeast Asia since President Trump's sweeping tariffs on April 2. We speak exclusively with Governor Remolona live from the Bangko Sentral. We get industry reaction from Citi Philippines CEO and banking head Paul Favila. Foreign direct investment net inflows in January dropped 20% year-on-year. And shifting realities, a chat with Filipino glass sculptor Michael Odlina on his first solo exhibit. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has cut interest rates by 25 basis points, bringing the key rate down to 5.5%. This move comes as global conditions grow more challenging and inflation becomes easier to manage. Bangko Sentral Governor Remolona says inflation is easing and now appears, quote, broadly balanced through 2027. He also said that slower global growth and U.S. tariffs may drag on the local economy. Despite the risks, the Bangko Sentral plans more small rate cuts this year, but not at every meeting. Analysts agree with the cut, and they expect more easing ahead as inflation stays within target and growth remains modest. Foreign direct investments has reached $731 million in January. That's 20% lower compared to January last year. The decline came as non-residence investments in debt instruments decreased from December 2024. But more equity capital inflows has reversed last year's net outflows. Japan, the U.S., Singapore, and Malaysia led these investments mainly in manufacturing, finance, and real estate. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is the first Southeast Asian central bank to cut rates since Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcement. Elsewhere, central banks in India and New Zealand reduced their own last Wednesday. With us now for more, live from the Bangko Sentral in Manila is Governor Remolona. Good to see you again, Eli. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Cathy.
You know, 2 months just whizzed by from the last time we talked in February when you kept rates steady, and this time you cut by 25 basis points. Could you give us some color? How did the board vote? Was it a unanimous 25 or a near split between 25 and 50 or a near split between 25 and steady?
I wouldn't say unanimous. I'd say there was a consensus to reduce the policy rate.
When you say consensus, would that be maybe 3/4 of the board? That it wasn't that difficult to decide on?
It wasn't that difficult. The policy rate cut itself, that was an easy one. The more tricky one was what to do in the next few meetings. How many more cuts this year? That was the trickier question.
So it's trickier deciding what to do next. So what was the mood like just coming into that meeting yesterday morning? Because just hours after waking up to Trump, walking back on most of his tariff threats, but for China. So that was the kind of scenario that you had in trying to figure out what to do next.
Yes, there was some apprehension, of course. We're looking at slower growth, which is kind of a first in the last few years. And then we're looking at lower inflation, which is kind of good news. It gives us more degrees of freedom. So there was less hesitation in cutting the policy rate yesterday. Most of the discussion was actually about how many more cuts in the next few meetings. Do we cut every meeting or do we cut every other meeting? That was more the subject of the discussion.
Right, and whether it was because of faster inflation or slowing growth. I know that you mentioned that phrase, more degrees of freedom, after the March inflation result came out. So did Trump's 90-day pause matter in a big way in your decision-making this time around?
I wouldn't say in a big way. It matters, but uncertainty it didn't clear up a lot of the uncertainties. So when the reciprocal tariffs were announced, we got numbers that we could feed into our analysis. And then 90-day suspension meant maybe those numbers are not the right numbers. So it's some uncertainty came back. So that's why it was so tricky.
Right. I know that you've mentioned in yesterday's media briefing the computer models, and I believe there were
Yeah.
three computer models that you fed information to arrive at a data-driven answer.
Yes, yes, yes.
But they haven't really caught up with everything else that was going on. So there is this certain uncertainty on this challenging
Yes.
economic environment.
Yes.
So how much
Yes.
of the monetary policy decision making now is part guesstimate? And what part of it is data-driven? Would you say 50-50, 60-40, 70-30 in favor of guesswork?
My guess is 60-40.
All right.
60% based on numbers and then 40% based on judgment, but informed judgment, I would say.
And that's pretty important, the informed judgment, because what we're seeing right now, and I wanted to ask whether this was and is what the Monetary Board is seeing, a certain
Yes.
decoupling between the Bangko Central and the Federal Reserve, given the inflationary impact of the tariffs and what it could do to the U.S.
Yes,
economy,
yes,
slow
yes.
growth and cause faster inflation.
Yes, yes. Slower growth, higher inflation. Actually, we're looking at lower inflation at the moment, unlike much of the world. So we're in a somewhat different situation, I would say, than much of the world.
True, because that will be lower inflation for us, but perhaps faster
Yes,
inflation for the U.S.
yes,
So
yes.
they're starting to decouple from the rest of the world. Is that correct? The U.S. economy is starting to decouple.
That's correct. There's going to be less trade between the U.S. and the rest of the world, and there will be less trade in general. That means less comparative advantage, which means lower growth.
And I guess a lot more trade friction, trade war between the U.S. and China. What would be
Yes.
the impact of a trade war then between the two giants, the U.S. and China, over smaller countries like the Philippines? Would the risk be bigger on growth, which slows, or inflation, which risks turning hotter or faster?
I think the risk will be bigger on growth. When two giants confront each other, the rest of us are affected. So it's a question of to what extent we're affected and how big are the how big are the effects. But we're part of the world, so when the world is affected, we're also affected.
And when that happens, we don't really like the R word, do we? Recession. I mean, the U.S. faces the threat of a recession. Thus, the multiple Fed rate cuts that's expected by the market, 2 to 3 forecast cuts. How
Yeah,
mindful
yeah.
is the Bangko Central of keeping that interest rate differential to 100 basis points that now you enjoy between the Fed funds rate and the key policy rate at the Bangko Central?
The differential between the policy rates is a significant factor, but it's not a decisive factor. There are other things in play. For example, the market these days look at not just the policy rate differentials, but also the degree to which we are dovish compared to the degree to which the Fed is dovish. At the moment, I think the Fed is somewhat more dovish than we are. So those things matter, and then of course there's other things like global tensions, which tend to strengthen the dollar because the dollar has been the safe haven currency. Maybe less so today, but there's a lot of other factors that affect the exchange rate.
What about the peso, though? Now that you mentioned the exchange rate, how much of a factor would that be in changing the nuance in your dovishness?
Ah, uh, what we find is a large depreciation of the peso, even when it's a strong dollar story. A large depreciation of the peso tends to lead to some inflation in the Philippines because a lot of our imports are invoiced in dollars, Then depreciation of the peso means they're more expensive in peso terms, and that's inflationary.
Well, the peso has traded between 56 and 57 to the dollar of late. At what dollar peso exchange rate levels is the Banco Central buying or selling dollars as these global uncertainties prevail?
We don't look at the level itself. We look at how large the swings are, and if it. In fact, we don't look at day-to-day volatility. We don't care that much. Uh, we care about the peso when it depreciates sharply over a period of time, and then that becomes inflationary. By the
And
way, when the peso appreciates, there's no disinflation that follows. So it's a one-sided thing. It's an asymmetric thing.
that's true, but I'm starting to think about the overseas Filipino workers, so it's going to
Yes,
take a
yes.
lot more for them to remit to give their families the kind of money that they need on a monthly basis.
That's right. That's right. That's right. We do worry about that.
Is the GDP at 6% and above for all of 2025 still intact?
We're hoping it will still be intact, but now there's risk. There's risk that we will see lower growth than before.
So if that's the case, would maybe 5%, 5.5% be the lower end of the band then?
I'd say more like 5.2, or, but not less than that. We're still hoping for 6.
So what are the chances that we could still hope and reach towards 6%?
We'll look at the data some more, but we can't say at this point. There's too much uncertainty, Cathy, to be more definite about the growth rate.
That's true. I just have one final question. Is there any existing blackout period before the BSP rate setting meeting? And if yes, how many days before the BSP monetary policy setting meeting?
We have a blackout period of 7 days. So I can't talk to you 7 days before the
I know. That's
before
why I
the
wanted
policy
to ask.
meeting.
That's why I appreciate you giving us all this information before those 7 days come up on the countdown. Thank you, as always, Central
you,
Bank Governor Eli Remolona, joining us live from the Bangko Sentral. And you're watching Money Talks. Coming right up, further discussion on BSP's policy rate cut with Paul Favila of Citi, Philippines. And later on, glass sculptor Michael Orlina talked about his first solo exhibit. These conversations up next. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. The White House clarifies that the staggering tariff imposed on Chinese goods is not 125%, but 145%. Not backing down, Beijing increases its retaliatory tariff from 34 to 84%. The tit-for-tat between the U.S. and China causing the world to witness what the Deutsche Bank described on Thursday as, quote, a disorderly economic decoupling between the world's two largest economies. Trump signals openness to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping as Beijing vows to protect its interests.
What happens with China? We would love to be able to work a deal. Well, I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
你提到的这种情况
The situation you mentioned is caused by the US's hegemonic and bullying acts of exerting maximum pressure. China will continue to take strong measures to safeguard its own legitimate rights and interests.
The Trump administration offers few details in trade negotiations with over 70 countries. U.S. officials are unlikely pursuing comprehensive trade agreements that take years to broker and require congressional approval. Trump paused duties for 90 days as most countries refuse to retaliate against the so-called reciprocal tariffs. Meanwhile, the European Union decides to pause its first countermeasures against U.S. duties to give way for negotiations. The bloc was set to launch counter tariffs on $23 billion of U.S. imports starting next Tuesday in response to Trump's 25% levy on steel and aluminum. U.S. inflation slows unexpectedly this March, a welcome development, but one that analysts say is short-lived due to the tariffs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, consumer price index for March is at 2.4%, cooler than February's 2.8%. Economists expected a rise of 0.1%. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy items, also slows to 2.8%. Analysts say the drop can be attributed to lower gas prices. While the CPI is cooling normally, welcome news, investors will have a hard time reading too much into the March data. Trump's Liberation Day announcement of sweeping new tariffs are not yet factored into the inflation print until next month's report. U.S. markets wipe out much of its Wednesday gains as Trump escalates his trade war with China. The Dow slid this Thursday by 2.5%, S&P 500 falling by about 3.5%, and the Nasdaq ended the session lower by 4.3%. The 10-year Treasury yields declined to 4.39%, and gold prices climbed to a new record high, settling at $3,159 per troy ounce. Global markets soar, catching up with Wednesday's announcement of a 90-day reprieve on reciprocal tariffs. Most Asian markets recorded sharp gains. Australia's ASX 200 up by 4.5%. South Korea's Kospi climbing over 6.5%. And Japan's Nikkei 225 soars by 9%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng is now up 2%, and China's CSI 300 rises 1.3%. Taiwan's TAIEX surges 9%. Over in Europe, the regional stock 600 rises 3.7%. London's FTSE up by 3%, and Germany's DAX climbs by 4.5%. France's CAC 40 ends the session higher by 3.8%. Let's take a look at U.S. futures. They are indicating an extended decline. When the markets open later tonight, Manila time, with all those down arrows, the Dow falling by 1%, S&P declining 1.1%, and the Nasdaq sliding 1.3%. Asian markets also lower at the get-go this Friday. ASX down by 2%, Kospi sliding 1.5%, and the Nikkei down more than 5.4%. Take a quick check on the Philippine markets and see how we're doing. If we're opening any lower or higher, PSEI opens lower. Joining the rest of the Asian markets, down 0.4% at 6,048, holding above the 6,000 mark. Stock market closed yesterday, Thursday, higher by over 1%. As for the Philippine peso, it is still stronger at 57.22 to the dollar. The peso closed yesterday slightly weaker at 57.35 against the greenback. With us now for more is Citi Philippine CEO and banking head Paul Favila. Welcome back, Paul. It's good to see you again.
Nice seeing you too, Cathy. And again, thank you for having me on your show.
So, what stood out for you in what Gov. Eli had shared there moments ago, talking about the balancing act between slower inflation, slower growth, or maybe even faster inflation when we talk about the U.S.?
Well, it's a very uncertain world now more than ever. I thought the last time I'd hear myself say that was back during the pandemic, but now we're seeing something that I guess nobody could really predict. And this time around, it's happening much faster, and so it's all this uncertainty that surrounds us. And I guess where the central bank is and what makes a whole lot of sense is to begin with, they had a lot of policy space, and we've been saying this even as late as 2024. And that is giving them a lot of headroom in terms of how to act and how to move forward. Last February, we saw them pause, which was, I think, good in the sense that they were still weighing what would happen with the new Trump administration, and now that things are a bit clearer, they can more confidently implement the policies that they have been preparing for. And I guess what we're talking about here is further easing of monetary policy in the near future.
By how much more?
Well, Citi's house view is that we would see another 2 rate cuts this year, 25 basis points each, initially towards the latter end of the year. And that continues or remains to be the house view. Personally, I think there is scope for that coming in a little earlier and maybe a little bit more, just like what the governor said. We need to watch for what happens to the world moving forward. There is a huge amount of event risk ahead of us. And like I said, thankfully enough, inflation is very much under control. Again, kudos to not just the Banco Central, but the fiscal authorities as well. It is a whole of government approach. And with that amount of headroom, then that gives them a lot more maneuverability as well to navigate what's forthcoming. We are concerned about the impact on growth. For now, we continue to remain very optimistic on the Philippines and our growth prospects for the year. But it is very difficult to be certain at this point.
Okay, but 6%, do you think that's certain?
We're at 5.9, so 6% is still something that is within reach. I have shared my thoughts a few weeks back that there may be a silver lining for the Philippines, given that we are not a trade-dependent economy, in general. And this might actually open up opportunities for us to sort of catch up, if you will, and develop our own manufacturing capabilities, given the impact of the U.S. Tariffs on the global markets.
Okay. Well, it's great catching up with you. That's 2 more rate cuts down the line at 5.9% and the silver lining there. Appreciate that. Paul Favila, Citi Philippine CEO and banking head. The Special Assistant to the President for Investment and Economic Affairs, Frederick Go, will negotiate tariff matters with the U.S. Secretary Go said that the government has reached out to the U.S. Trade Representative and has communicated its intention to engage in a dialogue. He added that the best possible outcome is a free trade agreement, meaning 0 tariffs on products from both sides. The Trump administration has imposed 17% tariffs on Philippine exports, but due to the 90-day pause, the 10% baseline is in effect. For more details on the story, check out philstar.com. Filipino glass sculptor Michael Orlina holds his inaugural solo exhibition this month, Shifting Reality, in what is an exploration of glass, delving into what Galleria Stephanie describes as inherent mutability through meticulous cold working techniques. Well, joining me now in studio, the creator of this incredible glass sculpture, Michael Orlina. So good to see you, and thank you so much for stopping by. Such incredible artwork you've got here. It's called
Assyrian Visions.
Right. How did you
So
come
thank
up
you
with
for
it?
having me, Cathy. I was inspired by an artist named S.C. Escher, and he makes these drawings, like illustrations with lots of visual illusions. And I wanted to incorporate that, especially with the glass, because the glass provides that magic quality of shifting and changing as you look at it, and I like these illusions, and it brings it out so beautifully.
I know
in the medium.
At first glance, it kind of looks like Dad Ramon's,
Yes, yes.
because I know that the technique is similar, but then you use a different way of using the polish.
Yeah,
polish is
so
different,
that's
and
correct.
also the sandblasting.
Yeah, so it's called cold working. That's the way we do glass sculpture. And I'm using our tools, our machines in different ways to achieve different textures so that there's more depth and variation. And you're right about some parts being not polished or some parts being a bit more opaque to bring different dimension to it. And I'm still exploring those things. And under the guidance of my wonderful father, he helps me bring that out as well in the
it's
sculpture.
All in the family. I just realized that your mom's also involved in Museo Orlina.
Yes.
And also in the National Culture of Arts, you're very much involved in the policies that would bring out the best in our artists. What would you be fighting for at this point?
So as of now, as an artist and also as an heir of an artist, I'd like to fight for what's called resale rights. And it's actually part of our law right now. It's just not being implemented so much, but in the secondary market, if an artist's work is sold in, let's say, an auction, the artists or the artist's heir, 50 years after the death of an artist, should receive a percentage of that. And this relates to the artist's intellectual property, and it's important to give them these rights because they deserve it, and it lifts up artists and it gives them more power in a way, or more opportunity to be able to continue their art, to live their lives, and like I said, even their heirs. And it's something so important that I think all artists should believe in because it will benefit them so much.
As a final point, we've been talking a lot about different asset classes, the capital markets, not too good. What about the art market in the first 4 months? Are there a lot of buyers for this kind of sculpture?
I must be thankful that our art is selling, and I've noticed other glass artists as well. They're interested in the medium and they're selling as well because it's just a fascinating medium, and I think, especially here in the Philippines, glass art is really starting to grow, I think, and people just have a fascination with it, and I hope that continues, and I hope that the other artists can continue to sell their works and be supported by patrons of the arts because it's a big part of our culture, and I hope it grows more and more.
And that sculpture is going to go back to the exhibit, right? Because it runs throughout
This sculpture
April.
is going back to the museum.
All right, it's not taken yet, but it is for sale.
Oh, this one is just for the museum.
Well, thank you so
Private
much
collection.
for bringing the sculpture. I know it's a little bit difficult, but
No problem.
really appreciate it. It's the only way to appreciate great art.
Yes, of course.
Thank
you, Cathy.
so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was Michael Orlina, Filipino glass sculptor, with his exhibit happening now in Shangri-La, Mandaluyong, up to April 27th. And before we part, Mercury Drug President Vivian Que-Azcona has passed away on April 5th at the age of 69. She was the daughter of Mercury Drug founder Mariano Que and took over as president in 1998. In a Facebook post Thursday, April 10th, pharmaceutical company Unilab Group extended their condolences on the passing of Ms. Que. They called her a visionary leader and a dedicated partner who left a lasting mark on the healthcare industry. Mercury Drug Corp also announced Ke's passing and asked for prayers. Under her leadership, the pharmacy chain grew to over 1,200 stores with more than 15,000 employees nationwide. Ke's impact lives on Mercury Drug celebrates its 80th year of serving Filipino communities. That is it for Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again Monday, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. We're also streamed live on YouTube and on our Facebook channels. Have a great weekend ahead. I'll see you Monday.